you can think about this. I think it's worth thinking about, because I think this is how we think of each other. And I think this is how we treat each other. And I think this is what we upbraid ourselves for when we fail. You wake up in the morning, and what is it that confronts you? Now, you could say that it's the material reality of the circumstances around you, and that you're driven like clockwork by that. But that isn't how it appears phenomenologically, I don't believe. I don't see that that's how we see ourselves when we awaken in the morning. What we see in front of us is a field of potential, constrained to a large degree for some of us and wider for others, but still definitely present. And that's the domain of what could be that day. And I think the day is the right level of analysis. And you wake up and you confront the world and you think, well, here's a variety of ways that things could play themselves out today. And that's that field of potential that's in front of you. It could go this way, or it could go this way, or it could go that way. And you know that maybe you have difficult decisions ahead of you. And you know that perhaps you're motivated to avoid some of them, or maybe not to take the difficult decision, but to take the easy way out. And you have some inkling of how things would go if you did it properly, or if you avoided it, or if you took the easy way out. You can understand how the future would be likely to unfold if you took any of those patterns of action. And then you get up and you decide to act or to not act in accordance with your decisions. And as a consequence, you turn the potential that characterizes the future into the actuality of the present and the past. And so to me, what that means is that whatever your consciousness is, which in the oldest sense is the thing that has, what would you say? It's that which dwells within you, that's made in the image of the God who created things at the beginning of time. That's the idea, is that the implementation of that transforms the chaotic potential that confronts you in the form of the indeterminate future into the actual world. And that's what we do. And we do that as a consequence of our moral choices. And in Genesis, the claim is that insofar as God used the Logos to perform exactly the same function, then the habitable order that was created was good. And that's insisted upon repeatedly. And so there's a deep ethic there, and it's a very deep ethical idea. And the idea is that it's possible, you have within your grasp the possibility to take the world despite its suffering and its malevolence, and to confront it in a manner that, as a consequence of applying truth, will transform what you produce out of that potential into what is good. And that's a call for a particular form of ethical being. And it's on you. Is that you make decisions to go this way or that way, and some of the decisions lead up to something that's positive, and some of the decisions lead down to something that's negative. And if enough of us make the decision to move down into what's negative, then that's exactly what happens. And we create situations around us that are so close to hell that the distinction is merely semantic. And so you might say, well, you're no believer in heaven, and perhaps you're no believer in God, but you could easily be a believer in the ability of your own cowardly indecision and determination to use deceit instead of confronting things courageously and truthfully, to produce something around you that's hell for all intents and purposes. And I think that was the lesson of the 20th century. I think that's exactly what happened. I think that the reason it happened is because individuals abandoned their moral responsibility. And that moral responsibility is, in some sense, absolute enough to be unbearable. Having said that, so then my conclusion, because of all that, and for other reasons as well, was that, well, it was true that life is suffering tainted by malevolence, but that there was a power of spirit that characterized the human being that enabled him or her to confront that forthrightly, with nobility of purpose, and to transcend the suffering and constrain the malevolence, and that was within our grasp. And that what that meant fundamentally was that despite the undeniable structural reality of finitude and evil, that the spirit of the human being was so powerful in its potential that could be confronted and accepted as a fundamental responsibility, and then transcended and repaired as a consequence. And so that was an inversion of the most pessimistic possible view, I suppose, which is that life is ineradicably suffering and malevolence, into the opposite view, which is that if that is taken on voluntarily, then it's something that can be transcended and rectified. And that's the sacred responsibility of every single person. And worse, that the abdication of that responsibility, which is in some sense virtually unbearable in its weight, that the abandonment of that, or the avoidance of it, produces a void in the structure of reality that's filled by something that's hellish. And so it's not only that you fail to make things better when you could, by stopping doing the things that you know to be wrong, but that if you don't take forthright action, then the space you leave is filled by something that's dreadful. And so the conclusion of all that was that the collectivists were wrong, and those who insisted that the individual was the sovereign foundation of the state, and that each individual has a divine element that's the rationale for that foundational sovereignty and the reason for our equality before God and the law, that's correct in the most fundamental of ways. And so what I've been attempting to do since then, and I guess that's part of the reason why you're all here, I suppose, is to suggest to individuals that there's far more to you than you would like to believe. And that whether you manifest that in the world properly makes far more difference than you would like to imagine. And the downside of that is the crushing weight of that voluntary adoption of your moral burden. But the upside is the discovery of the nobility that's within you, that's of sufficient force and power to be aligned in some sense with the most fundamental